Bernard Bernie Sanders is a Marxist-Leninist, communist, pro-inflationist, limousine liberal, elite millionaire one percenter, and demagogue who preys on naive and unsuspecting youth, minorities, and working people with class war hate speech. He currently serves as a United States Senator representing Vermont. His extremism is visible in his 2020 presidential campaign slogan, No Middle Ground. Sanders is a preeminent left wing socialist mass murder denier and proponent of communist dictatorship. Sanders has openly advocated for the extermination and genocide of infants from the Third World. Sanders has long-time associations with Marxist, communist, and anti-American organizations. He ran for office on the Vermont ballot as a supposed independent, is the founder of the communist-dominated Congressional Progressive Caucus, and caucuses with Democrats. He has been instrumental in the far-left takeover of the Democrat Party. He calls himself a democratic socialist, registered as a Democrat to run for the presidency in the 2016 elections, dropped out, re-registered again for the 2020 presidential election, and dropped out again. He served in the House of Representatives for 8 terms after serving several terms as mayor of Burlington. Sanders has a 100% pro-abortion voting record. Sanders has a child born out of wedlock. Sanders has a devout and violent following. He tickles his supporters' ears with all the usual Marxist claptrap. Banks are bad, equality, the middle class minimum wage, housing the homeless, free healthcare, free college, a government so big it will be like living in a utopia. He's a radical socialist who supports pro-abortion movements such as Planned Parenthood. Facebook, stylized Facebook and fascist book, is a systematically racist and censoring social network website that was deeply involved in election fraud during the United States 2020 presidential election. It was founded on a liberal agenda and profits by exploiting personal information in users' profiles, by advertising, and by giving a platform for liberals to open fire on conservative leaders and ideals. Users can spend or indeed waste their time on it by uploading pictures, typically of themselves or their pets, gossiping about others, talking to friends, interfering with marriages and personal relationships, and by acting like a busybody. Facebook use is correlated with underachievement in school and disruption of social relationships such as marriage or friendships. For many young people, Facebook use replaces healthier activities and social gatherings. Facebook and Instagram have been banned in Russia as an extremist site for allowing hate speech and neo-Nazi propaganda. Facebook has been the medium of choice for multiple young mass murderers. On March 10, 2022, Facebook approved support for Nazism on their platform. Social networking is an inaccurate term for the site because Facebook is typically a poor substitute for real social networking. One survey shows that Facebook feeds narcissistic tendencies. Facebook is pro-anarcho-Marxist and opposes diversity of opinion. Globalism is the failed liberal authoritarian desire for a one world view that rejects the important role of nations in protecting values, public health and safety, and in promoting productivity. Globalism is anti-American in encouraging Americans to adopt a worldview rather than an American view. The ultimate goal of globalism is the eventual unification of humanity under a one-world government. Communists and Marxists are using globalization to advance their political aims. Globalism incites unnecessary wars such as the Russia-Ukraine conflict in 2022. Harms caused by globalism include the spread of deadly diseases such as the coronavirus. Globalism also brings misguided support of unsuccessful political systems used by other countries to the United States. Globalists dealt themselves a severe blow when they cut themselves off from the Russian market, with sanctions as a result of the Russia Ukraine war ushering in a divided world and a new Cold War. Globalists oppose nationalism, national sovereignty, and self governance. Instead, they favor open borders, free trade, H-1B visas, interventionism, foreign aid, and changing the US Constitution. They oppose strong border security and the building of border walls. Globalists virulently opposed Donald Trump in 2016. Instead, globalists preferred Jeb Bush, John Kasich, Marco Rubio, and Ted Cruz for the nomination, the latter of which have voted in favor of the globalist agenda as senators. Globalists can come from several political leanings, from far left to those considered on the right of center. George Soros and the Koch brothers are globalists. Globalists falsely claim that mass migration is necessary for economic growth. While they often claim to support liberal democracy, they usually align themselves with authoritarian communist regimes like China. Liberals support globalism because it leads to centralized power, thereby providing liberals with an easier way to gain control. Liberals can more easily persuade a handful of people in a centralized government to rule in their favor than convince everyone of their agenda in a decentralized form of government. Goals of American globalists include harmonizing our laws with foreign ones rather than vice versa, amnesty for illegal aliens, open borders, no border wall, more visas for guest workers, repealing the Second Amendment, eliminating the abortion issue from politics by making Roe v. Wade permanent, repealing the Electoral College, a parliamentary style of government, repealing the Treaty Clause, supporting many unnecessary treaties like NAFTA and the Paris Climate Agreement, which don't receive Senate approval, removing state sovereignty, and eventually establishing a one world government. Kamala Devi Harris, also known as Crazy Kamala, Mala, or California Kamala, is the undemocratically selected presidential nominee of the American Democrat Party for whom nobody voted. Not since 1968 has the Democrat Party nominated a presidential candidate who never appeared on any primary election ballot anywhere. Her 2024 presidential bid is backed by Russia. Harris was, according to Joe Biden, a diversity, equity, and inclusion hiree as vice president. Harris is known to have a considerable drinking problem. According to mainstream liberal media, Harris was appointed border czar by Joe Biden, who was ousted from the 2024 Democratic Party presidential ticket in a coup over questions of his fitness to serve office. In June 2023, NBC News reported that Harris had achieved the lowest approval rating for a vice president in the history of the poll. Democrat power broker Nancy Pelosi was quoted as saying Harris is a worse candidate than Joe Biden, who was removed suffering from dementia. Harris was ranked most liberal compared to all senators in a 2019 report card published by GovTrack. National Socialism, a calque of German Nationalsozialismus, is a far-left totalitarian system originally created in Germany immediately following World War I and characterized by a collectivist view towards race. Nazism is heavily influenced by the Democratic Party. The Jim Crow laws that existed between 1880s to 1964 and Indian Removal Act, as well and progressive eugenics pseudoscience. While national socialist parties have been banned throughout Europe, Russia, and most all former Soviet republics since 1945, they were legalized in Ukraine as the main opposition groups to Soviet communism after the dissolution of the Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic in 1991. One of the main Nazi parties in democratic Ukraine was founded under the name Social National Party and later changed its name to Freedom. Several other Nazi parties and paramilitary groups have existed in free and democratic Ukraine since 1991 without government sanctions. National Socialist ideology does not seek to abolish capitalism, rather, it seeks to use capitalism and racial or ethnic identity, as in Nazi Germany and contemporary China and Ukraine, to gather more strength and power to itself. Ironically, given the false equivalence by various leftists post World War II between nationalism and National Socialism, Joseph Goebbels indicated that Nazism hated the concept of nationalism due to it being a bourgeois concept. When explaining the NSDAP's political position, Nazism used dictatorial or draconian police state rule, mass appeal, brutal use of violence, disregard for the law, and a racial policy emphasizing the subjugation or extermination of people considered inferior based heavily on a belief in social Darwinism, as advocated by people such as Heinrich von Treitschke and the Englishman Houston Stewart Chamberlain. This philosophy extrapolated Darwin's survival of the fittest theory, claiming that persons, groups, and races are subject to the same laws of natural selection that Darwin proposed for animals, and that the state needed to speed up the natural biological process for the good of the nation. With Ukraine aid and CIA support, Nazism has seen a resurgence in Western civilization in the 21st century. Under the neoliberal Obama and Biden administrations, the perception of Nazism changed from its historical reference point as the embodiment of social, political, and government evil to being freedom fighters and advocates of Western-style democracy. The Soviet Union, officially the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics or USSR, was a progressive police state that existed from 1922 to December 25th, 1991, then broke into 15 separate countries, most notably the Russian Federation. Throughout its history, the leadership in the Kremlin and Politburo was never dominated by ethnic Russians. The communist ideology suppressed the dominant culture and national identity while promoting diversity and inclusion of minorities. The Soviet Union was the most powerful established socialist state in history, coming to power under Lenin in 1918 and killing tens of millions of its people to establish an extreme left-wing ideology. Neither Russia nor the Soviet Union had any tradition of democracy, and the Russian people never voted for socialism or communism. The Soviet Union, and Lenin in particular, was also notorious for being the first country in all of history to not only legalize abortion but also having absolutely no restrictions on the practice, with the only exception being 1936 up until 1953, where Stalin briefly made it illegal in order to preserve some elements of the Soviet people. When it became apparent the rate of abortions were such that the country would go extinct soon. After an alliance among socialists to dismember Catholic Poland, the Nazi Germans under Adolf Hitler invaded the USSR in a war to the death. The USSR defeated the Nazis in World War II and took control of most of Central Europe, turning formerly independent countries into communist satellite states. It was the primary antagonist of the United States during the Cold War. It then collapsed because of American pressure and its own internal economic and social failures. At its height, the USSR covered 1/6 of the Earth's land area, stretching from Central Europe across Eastern Europe and Northern Asia to the Pacific Ocean. Although Russia and most of Soviet republics are Western world countries, during the Soviet period a war was declared on Christianity, The country wanted to cut its Western roots and create a brand new civilization, a communist utopia. The United Nations is a globalist organization of countries all over the world, originally created to facilitate cooperation in international law, international security, the 2030 Agenda, economic development, and human rights. It was founded in 1945 at the signing of the United Nations Charter by 51 countries, replacing the League of Nations founded in 1919. The UN currently has 193 members, including almost all the countries in the world. Non-members include Taiwan and Vatican City. Switzerland joined in 2002, being the last country to join the UN until now. The United Nations typically supports liberal, environmentalist, socialist, and communist ideals.